Hey everybody, Dominic here, and in this video I want to talk about online discussions and how we can make better online discussions in our courses. I think that online discussions kind of have a bad reputation, and I think that comes from either overusing them or using them inappropriately. And so I want to provide a little bit of guidance because I think discussions can be very beneficial in an online course if we use them properly. So I'm going to show you just a list of recommendations that I've put together for a good online discussion. And I'm actually planning to share this out in the Canvas Commons as a template that you can pull into your course. And the reason I'm doing it that way is if you want to make a discussion in your course, go out to the Commons, grab this template, and just kind of read through this as a little bit of a reminder before you start crafting your discussion. So what are some things that we can do to make a better online discussion? Well, first of all, think about the prompts that you're using. The types of prompts that tend to work well for discussions are going to be things like an analysis, where you ask questions like, what is the importance of, or how would you define, and then allow the students to give their thoughts and hopefully make it somewhat open-ended so there's more than one correct answer. Compare and contrast. What are the differences between, or what similarities are there between? Cause and effect. We could say what may result from. What are the possible causes that have led to? And then clarification prompts. What is meant by? Explain how. But the overall gist here that we're getting at is that we want open-ended questions in which interpretation and personal views come into play. That's what generates a good discussion. What are some prompts that lead to bad discussions? Well, yes or no questions. Is X more common than Y? We don't want to do questions like that because there's only one correct answer. Don't be too vague with your prompts. Share a thought about this week's reading. There's no direction there. That could go in a million different directions, and it's probably not going to lead to anything that's that beneficial. Avoid implying bias. So it seems obvious that we should only agree with X. Wouldn't you agree? And I mean, you're clearly trying to sway the students in one direction. That's not going to lead to a very lively discussion if you do that. So those are some of the things we want to avoid with our prompts. Now, when you're doing a discussion, one of the things that we want to spur is we want to make sure that students are replying to each other. I mean, that's the whole purpose of a discussion. If we just post once and then move on, that's not a discussion. That's an essay. That's a submission to you, the instructor. Okay, so we want to have some responses. And what I would say is, rather than just saying post in the discussion and then reply to two people, I would provide the students with some potential ways in which they might reply. Give them some ideas that they can grab from. That's typically going to help them out a little bit and lead to better outcomes. So I've got some examples here. What's something about your peers' post that resonates with you and why? What did your peers' post teach you that you did not already know? What questions do you have about their post? What line of reasoning would lead you to agree or disagree with them? What idea would you add to their post to further what they have already said? How does their idea connect back to what we have already talked about? Is there a personal anecdote you can provide that relates back to their post? Could you see their post applying to some other situation? So these are prompts in which the students are going to be able to think about, and I would give them options. You might not give them all of these options, maybe you would, but I would give them multiple of these and say, pick one, pick more than one. Reply to multiple people with the same one. But then they've got a little bit of freedom to pick the one they want, but also a little bit of direction of what they should say. Okay, I think that can be very helpful. Now, some recommendations I have. First of all, how should you design a discussion? First of all, I would design with the learning objectives in mind. Is a discussion going to further the students towards their learning outcomes. A discussion is not always the most appropriate means of assessing your students. That should be something that should be something you should consider. Discussions often are a good way to conduct some amount of formative assessment to see, are my students comprehending this idea all right, or are they getting confused? So that's a good way to use discussions, but it has to be, obviously connected to the topic, and also be, you also have to, it has to be appropriate for the activity, appropriate for the learning objectives that we want to achieve. Provide two due dates at minimum. We want to provide a due date for the initial post, and then we want to provide a second due date for responses. And we want to pace those out appropriately, so students have a day or two where they can think about what everyone's posted and respond. And you might even do 3 due dates potentially. I mean, if the discussion is the major focus of a week's worth of learning, maybe you'll have the initial post, the first reply, and then the second reply. That's a possibility. But I would definitely do at least 2 due dates. Pace out the activities appropriately, pace out the discussion with other activities appropriately. So if the discussion is meant to get them thinking about the topic, and then they're going to go do some other deliverable based upon it, we want to make sure that we have given them enough time to work through the discussion, work through the ideas, maybe get some feedback before we have them go apply in some other assessment. Establish sensible parameters. So, think about the workload that you have on your students, and whether or not this discussion is going to be taxing on them based on everything else they're doing. And then think about the word count. I think word count is beneficial to establish what you're looking for. But it should be sensible. We shouldn't be tasking our students with a 1,000-word minimum discussion post. That's getting a little excessive. So I would give them a range, and really the whole idea of word count is just making sure that our students that there's some meat on the bone, really. And so just, I would say, make it reasonable. You don't want students to have to feel like they have to add more and more words just to get to the word count when they've already made a very concise argument 2 sentences ago. Okay, so something just to consider. Avoid getting into a rut, and what I'm really referring to is avoid reusing discussions over and over, week after week. We can use discussions, they can be beneficial, but if they are all we are ever doing, or we're doing them every single week and it feels like we're just kind of doing the same thing over and over, just with slightly different topics, that can be monotonous. So switch it up. You could even potentially do discussions, do multiple discussions in a row, but change the types of prompts you're doing. Like before we were doing clarification prompts, now we're going to do argumentative prompts. Okay, that can make things a little bit more interesting, at least. How should you facilitate a discussion? Number 1, be present. Discussions are not there for just the students to talk to each other and you just sit back and peek in maybe and be like, okay, yeah, they're doing stuff. You should be reading them. You should be looking to see what ideas are being brought up. And that brings us to our second point. Monitor the discussion, but don't immediately pounce in. And what I mean by that is, when you are looking through your students' responses, don't immediately just jump in and start replying to students, because that's going to make other students feel like, okay, well, I've got nothing to say then. The teacher's already replied, so I guess it's done. Students often will feel as though you have the final word. So you want to be mindful to try to let them have the discussion as much as they can. But then when it comes time for you to contribute in ways that encourage further exploration by the students. You don't want to go in there and just say like, yep, you got the right answer. That's exactly what you should have gotten out of this chapter. Good job. I mean, well, that's the end of the discussion. There's nothing else to say. The teacher has effectively ended the discussion. Instead, we should be going in there with prompts like, yeah, that's an interesting point. And I would wonder how someone who would have an opposing view might feel about that. I wonder if anyone else in the class could maybe elaborate on that perspective. You know, something like that. Something that's encouraging them to like, let's add more. What else do you guys think? Okay. Those are the kind of contributions we want to really aim for, I think. And of course, we can go in and provide clarifications if someone's kind of getting off course. You know, we can do that, but we don't want to contribute in such a way that it's just going to stop the conversation. Provide feedback in one of several ways. So my advice in providing feedback for discussions, because I know some of our courses have a lot of students. You might have, you know, up to 28 students in your course potentially. That's a lot of students to go and reply to, you know, and that might feel overwhelming. So here's what I'll say. One of the things that can be beneficial is you can, you know, reply to different students throughout different weeks if you have multiple discussions. You can put students into groups and respond to the group's contributions. That can help consolidate things a little bit. My personal favorite, big surprise, I'm always making videos, is to make a video and do a check-in, a weekly check-in video, in which you basically summarize the main ideas that were brought up in the discussion and call out some of the students by name and say, you know, Mary, you had a really good idea that you brought up in our discussion this past week about X, and you and some of your other peers also said blah, 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 blah. And then calling them out by name makes them feel like you're engaged, you're paying attention to them. They feel like, okay, this teacher is clearly here. They care about what I'm saying. And then from week to week, I would do my best to try to call out different students if possible. I think that's a really great way to give feedback, because if we sandwich that in with other things like the overview of the week ahead and other summary type stuff, the students are more likely to watch those videos, I think, than necessarily go read every reply that you gave to every other post in the discussion. And then lastly, revisit key ideas. I think it is very beneficial if you can tie as you move through a semester, if you can tie back ideas from the discussion of 3-4 weeks ago. You know, and that's again where the benefit of doing those kind of weekly videos comes in. When you do a weekly video where you summarize and give feedback, you are going to kind of get those main ideas that the students brought up, those bullet points, and it's going to be much easier to call back to those bullet points later when you have made that kind of a video. So then the discussion means more as a result. So those are just some of the things that I think are important with discussions. Really quick, let me just touch on a few Canvas things when it comes to discussions. First of all, I highly encourage that you put a rubric on your discussion. Your discussion has to be graded if it's going to have a rubric. And to get a rubric, you'll click on the 3 dots up here, the little kebab. This is when you're not in edit mode. Don't be in edit mode. It's a little counterintuitive, but you will go up here and there'll be a show rubric option. You'll see here that I've already made a rubric for this discussion. I've got 3 criteria for this rubric. I assess content, interaction, and prose. So content is really referring to, are the contributions on topic? Are they relevant? Do they demonstrate critical thinking? Interaction is about, are the responses to their peers, do they extend the ideas? Are they thoughtful? Do they promote collegial discourse? And then prose is really referring to, are the contributions cohesive? Are they easy to understand? Are they within the parameters established, like the word count? So that's the rubric I came up with. Yours might be different, but that's how I did mine. And then in regards to settings for a discussion within Canvas, if I scroll down here, a few things I'll mention. Allow threaded replies. I typically like to turn this on. It means that students can reply to replies and kind of have little side conversations within the larger one. I like to do that. I think that can lead to interesting ideas. Users must post before seeing replies. It's up to you if you want to turn this on or not. I personally, when I'm designing a discussion, I like to design it in such a way that every student's post is going to be kind of unique to them. So I don't feel a need to turn this on all the time, but I can understand there are times when you might want to. Enable podcast feed. I don't know that people are going to use this much. You can, in theory, hook up a discussion to an external podcast feed. I personally would not really use that, but it's an option. Graded, if you want to turn that on to make it a graded discussion. Again, you have to turn on graded if you want to have a rubric. Allow liking. I think this is kind of a cool idea. I especially think it's cool with this option right here, sort by likes. If you turn that on, then you could encourage your students to say, hey, go ahead and throw a like on a peer's post if you think that they had a really good post. And then the posts that get the most likes go to the top, which is kind of nice. I kind of like that idea. It's a way of rewarding those students who had really thoughtful and deep ideas that their peers enjoyed reading. So just something to consider. You can make group discussions if you want. You can set the point value. The rest of this is pretty standard stuff. So in any case, like I said, I think discussions they're not a bad thing. And I know that some people, feel like, oh God, I can't use a discussion. Discussion's the most boring thing I can do in an online course. It can be. It can be the most boring thing in an online course, but I think if we design them very carefully and we consider the objectives that we're trying to achieve, and we don't use them too much, that I think a discussion can be a good part of an online course and it can lead to good outcomes. So those are just some of my thoughts, and thank you very much for watching.